I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a lifetime of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and random music topics. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device for your listening pleasure. Want to help Velocities in Music grow? You can. Velocities in Music was founded on the idea of creating an enriching discussion about modern music. Please share Velocities in Music with the music enthusiasts in your life, and together we can move music discussion forward. Tom, speaking of lifetimes, it has been a lifetime since we recorded a podcast.
It has been a while. I looked
What
back,
have we been doing?
I didn't even realize that the gap was so big. I think life just got ahead of us, and then it's like, holy crap, we did our Bowie deep dive the first part of the year, which was pretty massive. Yeah. And then we did our one topic podcast about keeping up with new music. Do you listen to new music versus old music? And then there was a pretty significant lull there. So I'm excited to jump back into it with a good topic podcast tonight.
And what topic are we planning on covering tonight?
So the topic we're covering, and to give a little bit of background on this, when we initially launched the first season of the Velocities in Music Music League, we put it out there saying that whoever the winner of the league would be would get to choose a podcast of their choice, the winner's choice, for Jake and I to do. So that is the podcast that we are doing tonight. And the winner for that league was Sean Murphy. So Sean, congratulations on winning the league. And Sean's topic was very good, very thoughtful kind of topic. And it's basically about musical upbringing. How did your musical taste change as you grew up? Which pieces of it stayed the same? How did that happen? What were the big influencers in your life in terms of people and culture and circumstance? What about the bands that you really liked growing up that made you fall in love with music? What did you think was special about them? And then from there, like what of that music do you still listen to? What of it have you kind of shed and look back wistfully on, but not really listen to avidly anymore? And also along with that, like what are the main genres or bands that came to you at different parts in your life and helped expand your musical taste? And I think to me, like, so not to keep rambling, Jake, but I think it is all about expansion because, at least for me, like, I think a lot of the stuff that I liked when I was younger, it's not that I dislike it now. Maybe I don't listen to it as much, but it's more just you start with a small kind of pearl of knowing what you like, and that just grows and grows, and it gets built upon, and you end up liking more and more music. And so because of just sheer quantity, you don't always end up revisiting the stuff that you grew up with. But I think that's a kind of a cool topic. So once again, Sean,
so we get to reminisce during this podcast.
Yes,
that's exciting.
Be a pretty personal one, I think.
Yeah, and to start off with, we're now on season 3 of the Velocities in Music Music League, and if that's something that sounds interesting, we did a podcast a few years ago of what a music league is, and now some former coworkers of Tom's and current coworkers of mine built a music league app that is actually pretty sweet. It works really well for if you want to either start or participate in a music league. If you have any interest in that, go to musicleague.app and check it out. It's a free service. It's just really easy to start up a music league with your friends. We highly recommend it. I'm in 4 music leagues right now myself. Tom, I know you're in quite a few.
I think I'm in 4 as well. Yeah.
And we're going to keep doing Velocities in music leagues as much as we can. There is a limit to how many of these things that you can do, but typically I'm betting that we'll have they're usually 8 weeks long. You take a week or 2 off in between, so you can usually get like 4 to 5 of these things done in a given year. Yeah. So we'll definitely keep doing that as time comes, and every time we do a music league, the winner of the Velocities in music league gets to choose a topic. So this is the first one, trying to honor our commitment here. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that means, Tom, we get to do more podcasts because I've been missing this.
Yeah, me too, man.
So, Tom, give us a little bit of background. when did you first have your first musical awakening? When did you first realize that music made your foot tap?
All right, so we're starting with me, huh? I'm being put in the hot seat. All right. I've been trying to think about this and preparing, and I've made an actual concerted effort not to over prepare for this podcast. I want it to be kind of natural, but at the same time, like that very origin point is pretty hard to put your finger on, I think. I have a lot of memories growing up, when I was as young as maybe 4 or 5, of my dad playing music around the house. My dad listened to a lot of classical music, and then he listened to a lot of Beatles, Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, that kind of stuff, kind of classic rock. So
yeah, your dad was a hippie, right?
not quite. But
no,
he certainly enjoyed a lot of what you might call hippie music. So that's the kind of stuff that I remember hearing about from my dad, or being in the car with my parents and having the radio on. That's usually the kind of stuff that they were listening to is kind of 60s, 70s classic rock, pop, singer-songwriter kind of stuff. But at that point in my life, I don't recall very actively caring about it. It was kind of there, and I think I started to understand what its purpose was and what music was, and I knew the stuff that I heard my dad sing along to, and also songs that he would write. He was a songwriter as well, so I would hear him play piano and sing, or play guitar and sing, but I don't think that it really struck me, and I really fell in love with music until probably a few years later, when I started listening to it more for myself. Because there's always that point where I think that naturally, kids just grow up with music around. And also, it's not just the music that their parents listen to, but it's also kids' music, it's kids' songs. It's, there's nursery rhymes even that have kind of a sing-songy cadence to them. Those are just a part of, I think, a lot of culture's upbringing. And my upbringing was certainly no different. But I think that's music that is just, it's in the background, it's there, and it's thrust upon you. I think that once you actually start digging into music that you choose to dig into, you're not just doing it because it was there, you're actively seeking it out. That's where a certain sense of identity starts to grow within you about the music that you listen to. So for me, that moment was probably more when I was 7 or 8, and I just started listening to a lot of rock radio. For context, I was born in June 1989. So when I was 6 or 7 is probably where I draw that line, right around 95, 96. And think about the kind of stuff that was on the radio at that time. A lot of that music really, really struck me. And I think the reason I really started listening to those radio stations back in the day was because of my older brothers and their friends. And that's something that they really cared about. And I was just the kind of kid, I really looked up to my older brothers. They were taller than you. And they still are. I'm still the runt of the family. Would you believe it? I'm a pretty tall dude too, but still the runt. But I always just kind of thought whatever my older brothers were doing was what the cool thing was. So that went from anything like my oldest brother Dan memorizing the periodic table to all of my brothers sharing an enjoyment of music.
I think we should acknowledge the fact that you are the only person in the history of the planet Earth to think that your brothers are cool.
That might be true, but that was my reference point,
Yeah, sure.
Especially considering the age group that I'm talking about now. Maybe I was just starting kindergarten or first grade. I was just starting to make friends in school and kind of branch out and develop my own social identity. But other than that, I had 3 older brothers at home who all had very, different but lively personalities, and I got along with them really well. So the things that they cared about, I went out of my way to try to develop an interest in as well, because I just thought that that's what you did. And one of those things was certainly music. So I mentioned my dad liking that certain kind of music, but then my brothers putting on 90s rock radio and hearing stuff like Nine Inch Nails and Nirvana and Soundgarden and Smashing Pumpkins and Tool and stuff like that. That was a lot of what I grew up with. Between like first grade and probably up through like fifth or sixth grade, basically the last half of the 90s. Like,
I don't know if you said Metallica in there.
Oh, no, actually I didn't. Good point. Metallica and Blur, which are still my two favorite bands, I would say, I was listening to around then as well. But the thing is, like, I kind of went out of my way there to name a lot of the bands that I was listening to at the time that stuck with me. All the bands I just named are still among my absolute favorite bands. And I think that part of that is because I'd been listening to them for so long, but part of it's also just coincidence. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. Like, because there's a lot of stuff that I listened to back then that I don't listen to as much anymore. And there's a lot of stuff that I could have been listening to back then that I didn't, that I like now. I mean, for example, I remember when I was 8 or 9 and Radiohead's OK Computer came out in 1997. At the time, this was actually another big thing for me too. You know, aside from like family, listening to music and listening to the radio, my mom, when I was a kid, worked at the Ames, Iowa Public Library. And at the public library, you could go and you can rent CDs. You could check well, not rent really, because it was free if you had a library card, but you could check out CDs. And I would go to work with my mom essentially and just bum around the library like all day in the summer when I was in elementary school. Do that from time to time, and I would just look at CDs. And I remember, and Jake, this probably won't surprise you since you've gone record shopping with me, but like I would just go through all the CDs. And even ones that I had no interest in looking to, in listening to, I would just look at and like internalize like what the artwork was and try to figure out what kind of music it was. And like I remember just renting CD or checking out CDs like mad from the library and listening to a lot of good stuff that way. That's how I listened to The Downward Spiral for the first time, which I honestly, like the first time I listened to The Downward Spiral, I honestly didn't like it that much. I didn't really get it. I was like 8. It was definitely way too young an age to be listening to The Downward Spiral. I remember
how could you possibly relate to The Downward Spiral at 8 years old?
Right. I remember liking Piggy, and I liked Closer because I'd heard Closer on the radio. And like I said, like anything that I heard on the radio and made my ears spark, you know, I had to go check out the CD. And that one didn't really click with me, but I did love Pretty Hate Machine when I was a kid. So I still had that Nine Inch Nails kind of leaning, but the more intense stuff I didn't really click with until a little bit later. But anyway, back to my story about OK Computer. I remember getting OK Computer, and that was another one that, like The Downward Spiral, I was just like, it just didn't do anything for me. But then again, like I was listening to a lot of Metallica and Megadeth, and some of like the heavier stuff back then. So like I think a lot of the like clean guitar and atmosphere on OK Computer didn't really click with me. I was a much more like meat and potatoes, guitar, bass, drums, vocals, rock kind of kid growing up. That was the stuff that I connected with because I felt like, well, you know, I don't think I acknowledged this. I don't think I consciously understood this at the time, but I think I really connected to that performance aspect of it. And what someone could put into a vocal inflection and what someone could put into a guitar performance, like the things that really conveyed the human aspect of music. Like that's what really got me into it. So there was a lot of stuff though that I listened to back then that was just on the radio, was around, that like I don't really like come back to as much anymore, but I still probably know all the words. Stuff like a lot of post-grunge stuff that was out there, like Collective Soul and Fuel and bands like that, Third Eye Blind, that like they were around and it was all right, and some of them I liked more than others, but they didn't stick with me quite as much. So that was kind of the 90s and like elementary school for me. But
I'd like to just take a second and ask you, do you feel like your musical awareness occurred far younger than the average person?
Probably. I would kind of have to assume. I mean, I think that kids know what music is and like it probably at around the same age and have some kind of response to it, emotional or physical response, like you said, tapping your foot, kind of dancing around. Like that was certainly me as well, with like the Beatles and Paul McCartney stuff that my dad would put on. But I think that I realized just how much I cared about it. I think I attached to it more closely than a lot of people would at that age. And I guess I don't really know why. I think some of it is just, once again, like my surroundings and environment, being that there were, like my dad had a little home recording studio and a record player, and we had a cassette player and later a CD player. Like I just loved looking at all that stuff, playing around with it. I mean, like I honestly started recording music around that time as well, because I learned how to use my dad's recording software, and I would kind of just do like beeps and bloops on his keyboard and figure out little simple melodies and record them. So like it was all a very comprehensive experience to me. It wasn't just as simple as like, oh, I'm listening to this music and it sounds good to my ears. It was like digging into it more than that and being a part of it and figuring it out. It was just kind of a big sonic puzzle,
Tom, hearing you describe this in detail, it makes me laugh, because for years we've talked about this, and you've said, yeah, you started listening to music when you were like 3, and you're serious when you say 7 or 8, like you were going through bands and listening to music and evaluating music. And I've always thought that was funny, because this picture of this, kind of skinny red-haired kid listening to music all the time, that's funny to me, and it's so foreign, because I didn't like start seriously listening to music until, I was probably 9 or 10 then, but like not seriously comprehending what I'm listening to until I was in, the middle school, like 12, 13, that sort of, age, when you're starting to get, puberty is, threatening, like it's right there, hairs are sprouting. Yeah. And I feel like, and maybe I'm the one, maybe I'm a late bloomer when it comes to music, but like, I don't think I am. I think 3 to 8 is incredibly young for someone to truly start getting into music. And it's just so funny to me, because to you, you're just so blasé about, like, you don't realize you had this incredible opportunity just dropped into your lap with 3 older brothers who were significantly older than you, and very much into music. So much so that they knew they were into all the popular bands, but not just the popular bands, but like the underground bands too, the bands that you're not supposed to be into because it's taboo, right? The bands that you're gonna go to hell for listening to. Like your brothers, they exposed you to that, and they played instruments. Yeah. So they taught you how to play instruments, and your dad had a recording studio where he could record. Like you are the equivalent musically of like the like Long Island, like upper, like middle class to lower, wealthy white kid who goes to a college prep school when they're 12. Like that's you for music. And that nobody has opportunities like that.
Yeah,
like
I guess
you're
right.
a diamond. You're a diamond in the rough, and you're so blasé about it. You're like, yeah, I was 3 and I was spinning some tunes. It's mind blowing to me. I've always thought it was funny, and like it's so normal for you.
I see what you mean, but I mean, it's. I only know my own experience, I guess. You make a good point when you ask me, like, is that normal? Is that, how do you think that compares to other people's experiences? But I mean, I guess like different people, people are raised with different values,
Well, right. Like I remember, my dad playing records and dancing around the house with him, but like there was no musical instruments in my house. There was no, recording equipment in my house. There was no, I'm the oldest. There was no older siblings to kind of guide me and show me the way. Now, I for sure did that for my 2 younger brothers.
Oh yeah.
And frankly, you did too for my 2 younger brothers, but but I never had that. So naturally, when I started, listening to kind of pop radio of the late 90s, my dad, who was, it really was an ex-hippie. He was a hippie back in the 60s and 70s. said, no, thou shalt not listen to this crap. You were going to listen to classic rock. And then I was indoctrinated into Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd. And like those became my go-to bands. And there's many of those that I still listen to today, and many that, I don't go out of my way to listen to. But as I'm buying vinyl now, I'm trying to collect a lot of those memories. It's not just music, it's memories that I'm trying to collect, right?
For sure. So. Yeah, this is just a fun story. I remember when I was in 4th grade, so this must have been like 1998, early 1999. And we had just like this open time in class where we were like working on a project or something. And the teacher let this girl that was in my class put on a tape that she had. And it was of like country music. And after a few songs, I was like, this sucks. And I went and I took that tape out, and for some reason I had like a mixtape that I had made. So what I used to do when I was I would record songs off the radio. I don't know if you ever did that, Jake. I had this cassette player, and I remember in the summers, like I would just sit and I would do like crossword puzzles and word puzzles and stuff. And I would listen to the radio, and anytime a song came on that I really liked, I would hit record on my tape deck and record it to just this blank tape. And I have just a bunch of cassette tapes of this stuff, of like my own little like best of the radio thing. Is the 90s version of Spotify liked from radio, right? But you had to record it and get the fades right and everything. So I went and took this girl's country tape out and I put on this tape, and it was all like Metallica and Stone Temple Pilots and stuff. And then my teacher made me take it out. She got mad at me. I wasn't trying to be mean or anything, but it's just like, I don't know. I felt very, very strongly that we should be listening to my tape and not that one. But that's the kind of stuff I was doing, at that age, through elementary school. And of course, like things kind of changed, like once I got to middle school and high school. But Jake, I want to pass it back over to you before I talk forever and ever about like what was your first like conscious memory of really realizing that like you really liked music and kind of seeking it out on your own?
It had to have been there was a few instances. I can remember them pretty clearly. I remember like going on a road trip and hearing the Pink Floyd song Money. And trying to count the beat, because I was in band at the time, trying to count the beat and realizing, hey, this is in 7/4 time, and thinking that was really cool. And Led Zeppelin, I was very into Led Zeppelin 4. It's still probably my second or third favorite record of all time. Like right around that same era, there was a few albums that I latched onto, and then I kind of just, as I listened to like classic rock radio, I kind of just found other bands in that sphere. I remember getting very much into U2, Golden Earring for a time. Tom, you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Foreigner was in there, the Styx was certainly in there. There was just a number of bands kind of in those middle school years, all classic rock bands that I really got into. And then as I, kind of got into high school, I started listening to more, emo stuff. I was really into Dashboard Confessional. And to this day, I can't stand Dashboard Confessional anymore. Like you go back and listen to it and you're just embarrassed, right? Like that is one of those, it's not even a guilty pleasure. I would say Taking Back Sunday is a guilty pleasure for me because I still enjoy their first two albums.
Oh yeah.
But Dashboard Confessional, I can't listen to it all. But I remember there was a time when we were playing StarCraft. It was in like 2003. I was at your house. So you put on Kid A and numerous other Radiohead songs. And I remember the moment that Radiohead clicked with me. And I was riding with you in our friend Quinn's car, and I was in the back seat, and we were playing Kid A, and it was Idiotech was the song that was playing. And I got this feeling in my legs. And I will never forget this physical sensation. And to this day, when I listen to the album Kid A, the reason why it's my favorite album is because it transcends just music for me. I actually have physical reactions to it. It's the only album I've ever listened to that I have physical reactions to, like lights like flicker and seem weird to me. It's a very strange thing. I don't want to get into it, but I had a physical sensation in my legs, and I could not, like, my legs were like jacked, and very just this is a very funny feeling kind of right above my knees. Like it was just incredibly weird. But from that moment, I couldn't get enough of Radiohead, and I made like this Radiohead sleep mix and took all their slow songs, and then I tried to go to sleep, and I ended up not being able to sleep because all the slow songs were fucking awesome. So I couldn't sleep because
why would I sleep when this great music is playing?
Yeah, and so then then I realized that there was this whole nother world of music besides what was being played on the radio, and then I started to actively pursue it. And that's, to me, that was the moment where music changed for me, because it wasn't just the things that I was hearing through osmosis. It was me actively pursuing it, and I was on this hunt because there was a number of bands like right in a row: Death Cab for Cutie, Interpol, Coldplay, and the Mars Volta. Those 4 bands I really, really got into kind of in high school, and they made me see the world through a different lens. And any time that you listen to any music that transforms the way that you view the world, you naturally attach to it. And for me, I ended up chasing it, and I am still to this day chasing it. And through Velocities in Music, I've been able to discover, several albums over the years. Usually it's like one or so a year that I actually can find, and it changes the way I see and interpret the world, right? The last one that truly did that for me was 2017's Science Fiction by Brand New. Yeah. But that was kind of a journey as well, because I was very into that indie sound. I wasn't scared of heavier music, but Metallica I didn't get into, and Tom, we used to have these huge debates in the early days of Velocities in Music where we would be reviewing a metal album, and I would be like, this sucks, I don't understand. And I was trying to push through it and realize why I didn't understand. And what happened was I ended up falling in love with metal music, right? So Metallica is now one of my favorite bands, and you've pushed on to me Rush and Metallica and Blur and so many of these artists that just being your friend and going on this musical journey together has really expanded my context. I don't listen to music now just to try to find that next gem that's going to make me see the world differently. I listen to music now because it's fun, and I like thinking about it. I like assessing it and taking it apart. So to me, it's much more of a cognitive exercise as it is this like personal quest anymore. Yeah, to me, and I didn't realize this when I was younger. I'd say this is a revelation more of probably my 20s. But I think to sum up not to sum up, but to build upon what you were just saying about it being more than just like entertainment, more than just wanting to listen to something. Like the conclusion that I've come to is that it's really like music is really about communication. And I think that we naturally, when we're younger, we gravitate towards ideas that people are communicating that resonate more with us. Like that makes perfect sense, right? That's why kids listen more to kids' music. And as you get older, you get into, I don't know, there's a lot of like social and cultural influences there as well. But my point being, like I mentioned, that what connected with me when I was a kid was hard rock and grunge and some metal music like Metallica and Megadeth. And I think the reason that connected with me is because it fed both the intellectual and the emotional side of me as a person. One thing that Jake, you and like our friend Quinn had such a huge influence on for me and our friend Ian as well, is like where you were saying you were more of an indie rock guy, and like eventually you kind of got turned on to metal and started accepting some other things as well. Like I was more of a hard rock and metal guy, and it took me a while to get into the softer stuff and the more indie rock type stuff. And you and Quinn and Ian were a big help to me in that, because that was something that was kind of foreign to me. And I remember, you mentioned like 2003 listening to Radiohead. It was right around that time frame. I remember I was in 8th grade, you and Quinn were in 10th grade, and we would go over to Quinn's all the time, and Quinn would be downloading songs, and we'd listen to them, and Radiohead was one of those bands. This was like early 2003, so we were kind of getting into like their whole back catalog from that time, up through Amnesiac, and I remember really attaching to Kid A. But what was nice too is that was also just a few months before Hail to the Thief came out. Hail to the Thief came out in June 2003.
And that was right before my 14th birthday. And so there was also new Radiohead music to feed that like addiction and kind of nurture that like musical growth for me. But a couple of bands that I remember, aside from Radiohead, really helping with that expansion for me around that time were Death Cab for Cutie and Modest Mouse. Because at that time, like, I didn't listen to anything like that. Like, that was a little too indie for me. Like, I was more of a hard rock and a grunge guy. And coming back to what I was saying about, like, communicating an idea, I think the reason I liked 90s alternative rock and grunge so much is because it had the, like, intensity of punk music, which conveyed that emotional message and communicated that. But it still, like, it had a lot of complexity and nuance, which kind of fed my more intellectual side that I was trying to figure out music from as well. Punk music didn't really click with me till later because it was a little too simple. I remember hating the Ramones when I was younger. Yes. I love the Ramones now. Yes. But I remember hating them when I was younger because I didn't get it. It was too simple. Right. And that was something that didn't click with me. On the other side of that, indie rock, before I really started appreciating it, with all like the clean guitar tones and stuff, it had that technicality, that intellectual side, but it didn't seem to convey any emotion to me because there just wasn't that intensity there. So the music that I grew up with, that I attached to, really had both of those things, and it took me a while before I could really separate them and start to appreciate things that didn't fall within that. Another artist that I really liked, probably starting around like 2000, 2001, is Jack Johnson. And I didn't really listen to like a lot of acoustic music back then, like singer-songwriter type music, but that was one that I really attached to. And it was actually Mike Ball, who would later become my drummer, who introduced me to Jack Johnson, and he introduced me to a lot of other music as well. When I was in 6th or 7th grade, that was when he came over to my house with a bunch of funk CDs, and I was like, isn't this just like stupid, like corny, like old people's music? And he's like, no, this music's awesome. We're going to listen to it. And I've been a huge funk fan ever since, so I have him to thank for that. That was a big revelation for me as well. And then, like I said, like Jake, once you and Quinn and Ian started getting me into like Death Cab for Cutie and Interpol and Modest Mouse, I remember borrowing The Moon in Antarctica from Ian back around the time that Good News came out, and it just like it blew my mind. That was like a whole new world to me of this music that I really had not been exposed to before and not really had an understanding of.
All right, Tom.
Yeah.
Random question. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
And then I'll go after you, because that's fair. So, if you had to pick 2 albums that you would say these albums define who you are as a person, like if you want to get to know Tom Hummer but can't have like an actual conversation with you face to face, what are 2 albums that a person could listen to understand who you are?
I'm not gonna go with just my top 2.
I don't think you can.
I'm tempted to. I guess I would choose to answer that question by just going back to 2 albums that I remember influencing me at such a young age that they're just like ingrained into the fabric of my soul, essentially. And they are 2 of my favorites, but not my top 2. Those 2 are Metallica's Master of Puppets and Blur's self-titled album. Those 2 albums, I mean, I probably got into both of them right around 97 when Blur's self-titled came out. And those are 2 albums that I latched onto that I never stopped latching onto. I mean, like, for me musically, like those 2 are just monumental.
Yeah, those are good picks for you.
What about you?
Mine would have to be Led Zeppelin's 4.
Mm-hmm.
It just where that album goes, the expansiveness of some of the songs and how straightforward some of the songs are. You know, that kind of dichotomy between Simple and Complex, like that really, speaks to me. I relate to that a lot. And then also Death Cab for Cuties, We Have the Facts and We're Voting. Yes.
Yeah. God, that was one of those life-changing albums for me, for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
From there, what other like thinking of like milestones throughout your life. So I think that we talked through our lives up to like mid 2000s, like 2004, 2005, right around the time like I think that you were graduating from high school. Like what are some other big ones in that time frame or since then that's really like continued to shape you?
I remember my senior year of high school going down to Borders when there were still Borders, and I bought on a whim. I bought Arcade Fire's Funeral. It had just been released and had good reviews and stuff. And I was on this quest to try to find that album, and I listened to it, hated it, and I played it for I played it for my now wife Abby. She was my girlfriend at the time, and she hated it, and Quinn. Everyone hated this album. Skip forward 2 years, and I put it back on randomly, and I'm like, holy shit, this is an amazing record. And to this day, it's one of my favorite records of all times, and I owned it for years before I actually fell in love with it. So, that shows how taste can evolve and change over time. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, Tom, I used to not like Blur very much, or Metallica, obviously. And now they truly are some of my favorite bands, and you have a lot of credit that you get to take there. In fact, it's actually not fair for me to talk about most of my music, because basically from the point, like in college, I was kind of still chasing music, but I was also starting to experiment more. And you when we would hang out, which we have always, basically, Tom, for like over half my life, you and I have been very close friends, and you have been shoving music down my throat.
I just did it like a month ago when I was at your place.
Yeah, like I'm like,
hey, let's listen to Can and Most Def.
Yeah, there is nothing I can do. That's actually one of the things that I love about hanging out with you, is I know that I'm going to get my mental sonic palette expanded upon whether I like it or not, right? Like, I'm going to leave the jokes there. But there's just so many albums over the years that I've picked up from hanging out with you that it's honestly not fair for me to kind of answer some of these questions, because almost like half the music I listen to now is just traced back to, me and Tom listened to this. Yeah. And Tom, a good example of that, I remember when we were in college, we skipped a class or something, and we were playing cribbage and listening to music at your house. Yep. And you put on Armchair Apocrypha by Andrew Bird. Mm-hmm. And I remember you were like pretty blasé about the record. You're just like, oh, it's good music, let's put it on. And I was like, holy shit, this is a game changer. And I have not put that album down since then, right? And it actually kicked off this very deep love I have for like mid 2000s Andrew Bird, right? Yeah. So that's the sort of thing, like albums that you have found over the years that you might not be particularly into, I will latch on to. And I think that's kind of happened vice versa as well. Like there's been...
It has. I was going to say, I mean, you have to give yourself credit here, because it's not been a one-way thing. So like, I remember like, I'm pretty sure I put Andrew Bird on that day because I was like, this seems like something Jake would like, and it was fitting my mood at the time as well. Like, I knew that I was never gonna like absolutely love it. I like it a lot, but didn't click with me that way. But I'm like, this fits my mood. It seems like something Jake would like. Let's go for it. But like, you are the person who introduced me to M Ward, Wolf Parade, TV on the Radio, Menomina. Like, mm-hmm. and all of those bands have put out some incredible music that's some of my absolute favorite music. I was going to say the Shins. I think the Shins was more Quinn. Yeah. I think he's the one that turned us both onto them. But like, that's certainly gone. I feel like we just kind of like converged at some point.
You and I definitely have. I feel like our musical taste is pretty darn similar at this mm-hmm. point. There's certain like, if you're really getting into the details, certain preferences that I think you and I each have, but like we rarely vehemently disagree on a record anymore. So, but I would say, like, if there's, if you folks out there who are listening to this are wondering like how you can continue to get into new and more music, I think that the fundamental like, I would not be listening to the music I am today if I hadn't had deliberately set out to to find people, like-minded people who were interesting in experimenting with interesting new music. And to me, discussion was the critical piece. It's the critical catalyst. Is you have to have somebody to talk about music with, and it's not just listening to assholes like Tom and I on a podcast on the internet. Like, it's not just that. You need somebody in the flesh that you can experience music with and talk about it. Discussing music is what opens the door for you to understand something from a different point of view, which in turn leads you to find new music. And as soon as you find another album that you like, it opens up the door for several of its influences or other albums that are similar, and you just get this network effect that it just starts building and building and building. But it's all emphasized and expanded through discussion. And that's what I think Velocities in Music is really all about, has been this discussion, Tom, that you and I have been carrying on for more than a decade now about music, and this absolute just drive to keep turning over the stones and keep dissecting and understanding, like increasing that level of understanding about why we like music. I think that is one of the most rewarding things that we have as human beings.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it comes back to what I was saying too about music as communication. I feel like the more music that I can understand means that I can connect to the world and to the people making art and trying to convey a message. And like that means a lot to me. Like I love people. I'm a people person, and I love humanity and the drive to connect to people in a more personal way. Like, music can communicate an idea and a feeling in a way that a lot that just talking can't necessarily do. But that's where you kind of put the whole package together, and that's why I love what you were saying about music discussion and dialogue. Like, that's what this show is based on, right? Because it's not just about listening to music, and it's not just about talking, but it's about sharing those two experiences together. Listening to music and having a profound personal, emotional, and intellectual reaction to it, and then having someone to bounce that off of. You can expand their worldview. They can expand your worldview, and it's all centered around this piece of art that someone made. I mean, I'm getting full on like fired up about this, dude. This is what I love. And actually, let me share. So let me share along those lines. As long as we're on this, on this rabbit hole here, I want to diverge from the topic for just a moment and mention something along those lines that I thought had a pretty big impact on me, Jake. And that was about a month ago when I was at your place in Arizona, and me and you and your kids went to the Musical Instrument Museum. That was fun. An amazing experience. But like the thing that I kept thinking about after that experience, because while I was there just like looking around at just this insane number of instruments and like from around the world, sectioned off by like geographical region. I mean, this place had like over 6,000 instruments. I was amazed by it. Got to give a plug to that place. Go visit it if you're in the area. But like when I was walking around there, Jake, like I was overwhelmed. I was like almost in tears at points, and I was trying to hold it in, but I was trying to pick that apart and figure out later, like, what was it about that like had such an impact on me, just being surrounded by all these like musical instruments. And what it really got me thinking of is like, you see this instrument and it's some like, maybe like some weird, ugly looking lute thing from like some Scandinavian country that was made like 200 years ago. Right. And I'm sitting there thinking like, this is cool to look at. It's kind of a neat piece of history, but what does it mean to me beyond that? And the thing is you think about hundreds of years ago and throughout human history, throughout documented human history, we've discovered that humans always have made these instruments. And I see this instrument that was made by someone hundreds of years ago in some absolute faraway place, someone whose life could not be more different than the life that I'm living today, right? Hundreds of years ago, different continent, and so on. And yet, I really believe, like in my soul, that what that person was trying to do when they set out and decided that their precious energy was worth being spent on making this instrument, that what they were trying to do is really not that different than what I'm trying to do when I write music today. Like, think about that, you know? That person had something to communicate and something to share with the rest of their society and the rest of the people around them. You know, recorded music didn't exist then, but it still served a very similar purpose. And like the fact that this is something that has just been ubiquitous throughout human history is pretty powerful when you think about it. Like, it goes beyond just like conscious thought. It's an instinctual thing that is really powerful to me. So like that was something that was honestly kind of a big moment to me. That was a lot of fun going there. Sorry, that was a little tangent, but
no, it was a great time, and it was fun because, like, you know, I could tell how much you were appreciating it. Especially, you know, what I found interesting about that experience was, you know, they had the whole, you know, modern, kind of like the modern rock area where they had, like, you know, the guitar that Elvis played and the piano that John Lennon wrote Imagine on. And, you know, that was cool, but that wasn't the part. Like, it was the like really ancient instruments from like civilizations that are gone now from across the globe. Like, that's the stuff like you were saying that really got to me, because it shows that like there is something like human tying us all together, right?
Right.
And that is powerful. And, you know, so I had an interesting experience because I had my 2-year-old daughter in the stroller and my 4-year-old son, who I was, you know, I have an amazing wife who's a great mother, and me trying to wrangle my kids, when my wife isn't there is always an interesting time, but they actually got into it, and then they had, you know, the headphones on and they were listening to all this music, and to watch their eyes get big as these like TV screens would light up and music would start playing of these various instruments. Like, wow, that was incredibly powerful. So I was getting it from like both angles.
Yeah, because you're kind of experiencing it through them.
Yes,
and like you realize like they don't have all of the life experience that you do to make you care about such things, but they still care about it and they still enjoy it. Like, that's so cool.
Yep.
That's a neat thing.
Yeah, it was fun.
I want to jump back to the original topic that Sean had discussed, because one thing that he said was, what were some pivotal stepping stone bands, and like what were some genres that you disliked before but that grew on you with age? And something growing on you with age, I kind of jump back to, like, to me that means it was something that you didn't understand and now you do and you appreciate. Maybe the message that musician had for you just didn't resonate with you at a certain time in your life, but you come back to it and you do. So we kind of talked about like our experiences kind of up through high school, Jake. But I think it's important to note that if you're really seeking things out, your musical taste and experience can continue to expand beyond just, you know, your formative years as a person. Like, in college and since then, you know, as a 29-year-old sitting talking with you today, like, I'm still having this happen all the time. Back in college, some kind of pivotal albums or bands for me were when I started getting into, a big one was Peter Gabriel's So. I hated a lot of 80s music for a long time, and it's because I could not get past that production aesthetic. Everything sounded so fake and so cheesy with the big gated drums, and I couldn't picture people performing what I was hearing, and I just hated the way that everything was made to sound with the synthesizers and the drum machines and things. Peter Gabriel's So was a big one to me because once like that really hit me on an emotional level, I realized I'm like, you know, the way that this sounds is just a product of the time, but the message underneath it is still just as big as ever. And Peter Gabriel makes a lot of very emotionally impactful music to me, and that was a big one. So that was a big one for me. And like from there, also, you know, like other 80s kind of synth-based stuff like Depeche Mode, I started appreciating that a lot more. And once I got past that, I started liking a lot more post-punk. I remember when I was in high school, like just coming to terms with the fact, like, I think I just hate post-punk. I really didn't like Wire. I wasn't into the Smiths. The Pixies sounded cheesy to me even. And now I'm like, I love all of those bands because they're good songwriters. Like, it comes back down to songwriting once you get past that sound.
I remember when you were in college, you got into Captain Beefheart, and therefore I got into Captain Beefheart, and that never really stopped. I think that you still listen to that 5 times a day.
Yeah, that was a monumental album for me when that finally clicked with me, and it took a while to click with me, but like it was one of those things that like it just had this allure to it that kept me coming back. And I'm like, I have to figure out what it is about this album that makes it so special. And then like as I kept listening to it, I was like, holy crap, this is brilliant. So that was a big one too. But in more recent years, I would say like, well, around that time, I was also listening to like Saxon Shore and Explosions in the Sky, helped me get into post-rock music. Probably the biggest musical obsession or epiphany that I've had really recently, though, was in 2014, which is a few years ago by now, but still, right around 4 years ago this time, when Aphex Twin clicked with me. And I became obsessed with Aphex Twin, and I have not stopped. And that was big for me because, like I said, growing up, I really attached to the performance aspect of music and what that was communicating. But like once I started understanding Aphex Twin and realizing that like through composition and programming, you can still convey a lot of those ideas even if that performance aspect isn't there. As long as it's being done well, that can still be really, really good, profound music. So that's, Aphex Twin has since become one of my absolute favorite artists, and I can't imagine ever not liking it, but, now I do. Same thing with, I mentioned I used to hate punk music, and now, finally getting into the Ramones and understanding them was pretty big, and that's opened me up to a lot of other stuff. So, I'm not trying to say, by the way, I feel like I should put the disclaimer out that it's not like every piece of music in the world is inevitably going to connect with you at some point in your life. Like, it's okay not to like everything. There's still plenty of stuff that I don't like, still plenty of stuff I used to like that I don't really anymore, like Limp Bizkit. I listened to Limp Bizkit's album Significant Other a couple months ago just because I hadn't listened to it in years, and it was my jam when I was like 10 years old. And I was like, oh, I bet, I know that this like isn't really great, but I'm sure that I'll probably enjoy it just as much as I did, just for fun, nostalgic reasons. No, it was terrible. It was that's one, like you mentioned Dashboard Confessional. That's one for me. I mean, I still listen. Sorry, go ahead.
For me, it was Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, and Dashboard Confessional. I was super into those 3 artists all at the same time. And we in one of our music leagues, Tom, that we're both in, is a song from Linkin Park's second album, Meteora. And I put it on yesterday when I was driving somewhere, and I was like, this isn't so bad. And then the chorus came out. I was like, screw this. This is terrible. Like, this is awful. How did I ever like this? And Limp Bizkit, I had a similar experience with Chocolate Starfish.
See, like for me,
and it's just I'm getting a headache thinking about it.
See, for me, I even liked a lot of new metal and butt rock stuff at around
you do,
the year
and
2000.
I still don't understand it because it's all bad.
The thing is,
bad,
dude,
Tom.
But no, I will disagree with you there because I don't think it can all be pigeonholed. I think there's a wide variety of quality. Like some bands that I will defend from that genre till the day I die are like System of a Down, Slipknot, Deftones. Like, I think those are all great bands.
I agree. Those 3 bands are good.
I even still, now this is where I'm going to lose you. I'll still defend select music from like Disturbed and Chevelle.
I was going to say Chevelle. You will defend Chevelle.
Yeah, I really like Chevelle. But like I was even then, like I was listening to a lot of other stuff that even back then I was selective about like the albums that I liked, like bands like Breaking Benjamin and 3 Days Grace and Trapped, where I'd like one album and then I'd be like, okay, even I think that this other stuff is garbage. But like I can go back to that stuff and still enjoy it. So like,
yeah, I can't.
So
that makes only one of us.
See, I mean, like I'm not gonna put it on all the time, but every now and then I'll put it on, and it's fun to listen to. But like, dude, man, when I put on Limp Bizkit's Significant Other, which the funny thing is, even when I was 10 and loved Significant Other, I still thought that their debut album $3 Bill Y'all was complete trash. So if now I even think that Significant Other is trash, I don't even want to listen to their first one. I shudder to think what I would think.
Back in those days, I was, in the early 2000s, that pop punk scene was really big. Simple Plan, Newfound Glory, Taking Back Sunday, Brand New's 2003 record, Deja Entendu, which is one of my favorite records of all time to this day. I remember, being like 15, 16 years old and just jamming out to that while I mowed my parents' lawn,
Oh, yeah.
But the reasons why I liked it then are very, very, very different than the reasons why I like it now.
Yeah.
And I had to, as I grew up and as my personality changed and therefore the way I listen and interpret music changed, my understanding of that album changed. So it kind of grew. That album had enough allure for a 15, 16-year-old kid, but to get into, but also enough depth for me to still come back to it and love it for years to come, right? So that is kind of a remarkable album in my mind, because it has stood the test of time regardless of kind of the age and personality that I've been equipped with at the time I was listening to it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, Tom, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Talking about all of the music that we wished that we would have never heard. Tom, I'm also very excited to find that gem of an album from 2018. I feel like we get a hidden gem record every single year.
Yep.
It usually ends up being one of our favorite albums of the year, so I'm really excited. I think there's been a couple this year that I've keyed in on, but I'm interested to see if we come up with something completely different, because out of every year that we've been listening to music and recording our thoughts and putting it on the internet, I feel like this year we're the most disconnected than we ever have been. So I'm very excited for the end product of that disconnect, as I've kind of, because of physical location, I'm 1,500 miles away from you now, listening to music in isolation, and we only talk about it when we when we can. So it kind of shapes it a little bit differently. So I'm interested for that to happen. Very soon, we will be back with another topic podcast for the winner of Velocities in Music League Season 2. Very excited about that. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple weeks with another podcast topic. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and your emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So, as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.